Good morning, and welcome to Making Sense of It. This program is our gift to you from the Glasser Institute for Choice Theory. Each week, we have a member of the staff talk about one of Dr. Glasser's concepts and how it works in their life and the amazing results that is coming about. Those of you that are watching live, I would encourage you. Our guest today, let me tell you that, is Nesha Courtney, and she works with trauma victims. And there's a lot of trauma victims, but this is kind of like the traumatic trauma, those that have lost memory and then trying to regain and learning a new normal. And I look forward to Courtney sharing with us. I've had the privilege of hearing her before, and she has great passion. So I would encourage you to make to take notes so that after the program is over, and we do have some interaction, so you can ask questions or make comments. In the meantime, just sit back and relax and enjoy. And Nesha, welcome. Welcome to everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. And I appreciate having the opportunity to come and talk today. Um, you know, as Mona was saying, I do a lot of work with trauma, and chronic pain is the other area that I really specialize in. And what we find is that people hold trauma in their bodies. Um, Whether the trauma is from childhood, from an accident, um, we find that a lot of times it manifests itself out as a pain condition. And so when we look at, I'm going to start talking about chronic pain, how that evolves. Um, there are a couple different definitions for chronic pain, and the most commonly used is pain lasting 6 months or longer or beyond the typical time frame of an injury. And this is where we really start to see some of that trauma coming out. Um, and pain in 2018 cost the US more than $1 billion per week. And when you think about how trauma relates to that experience of pain, you can really start to see the increase in the physical costs, or the monetary costs, shall we say, of trauma and pain. Now we're looking at the wonderful world of COVID and how this is really exponentially exacerbating the experience of trauma. As we know in studying Glasser, a big part of what we do or what we need is that connectedness to other people. And under COVID, a lot of that has been taken away from us. And we're starting to see, well, not starting, for over the past year, we have seen a significant increase in the number of adults and children. When I say children, I'm talking, young children all the way up through adolescence, coming in for therapy because they're not getting this connection through anything other than a video camera. Um, we've got increased suicide rates, and it's really starting to get scary. We know that with trauma and pain affects how you sleep. Trauma affects how you sleep. When you decrease your movements, you increase your weight, you have comorbid medical conditions that start to pop up, heart conditions, pulmonary issues. And when you are involved with higher levels of activation of that sympathetic nervous system, that fight, flight, freeze system, it causes extra taxing on these systems. So we start dealing with a lot of external influences, which includes your family, friends, employers, physicians, neighbors, that all have impact on our daily function. And it changes the relationships that we have with these people, from the interpersonal relationships with family and friends, the minimal coping skills that we tend to have really start to rear their ugly heads. And we end up with grief, loss of identity for people. under COVID, we've seen a lot of people who, again, can't go to school, can't go to work. And a big part of our identity often comes from what we do. Think about the last time you interacted with a new person. It's not often time, hey, Mona, tell me who you are. It's, hey, Mona, what do you do? So that becomes a big part of our identity and that connection to other people. So you're starting to kind of see the connection that we've got going on here. Oftentimes, physicians, the first thing they do is they start throwing out opioid medication, narcotic medication, because they're not making the connection between the trauma and the pain levels that are going on. Because again, pain is often the physical manifestation of trauma when it's not directly associated with an accident or an incident. So one of the goals that I have is to really support them as they move through the process, to get them to focus away from the past, whether it be the pain and the trauma, and focusing on the present. And so one of the things that I often use as an example is one of my former patients, and I'm going to call him Tom, and he had a lot of back pain. And so in dealing with his needs assessment, we realized he had a really high level of belonging. And his second highest need was fun, with freedom just right there. And he didn't feel that with this back pain that he had the ability to participate with his family. And they had a very close, active family. So that was his primary social network. And we took that away from him, or he felt that that was being taken away from him. The people that he worked with, those connections, they stopped asking him how he was doing. You know, and they stopped reaching out to him. So we did some education on total behavior. We talked about how his pain had increased. And we did a lot. When I talk about the education of total behavior, and I don't know how well you're going to be able to see this because I'm just going to hold it up to you, but I have this wonderful car, and I use this a lot with my patients in doing the education around total behavior and how when we change our thoughts and our behaviors, even in a modified way, the rest of the car can help us turn the corner. And when I talk to my clients about total behavior, I often use the example of sometimes our car is a little smart car and the whole thing turns the corner at once. And sometimes we're dealing with that extra long double stretched limo, and it takes a little more activity and practice to get those back wheels around the corner. But it's knowing that as long as we continue to make the changes to our behaviors and our thoughts, the whole car does eventually turn the corner, and you just got to know that it is coming. And so sometimes it's just making some of those small modifications. So in Tom's example, one of the things that his family did every year was they went to the beach. And he had a lot of depressing behaviors because he was so focused on his back wheels, how much his back hurt, how depressed he was feeling because of this inability to participate, or what he thought was an inability to participate. So we modified some of his activities, and we got him one of those folding chairs, one of those folding camp chairs that were real easy. And we adjusted his activity or his action. He was able to go when he needed to sit down. He had a chair that was right there with him that he could sit down in. It might take him a little bit longer to catch up to his family, but he still got to participate. We talked about his quality world. And part of that was being able to participate with his family, because the picture that he had in his mind was, you know, going to the beach with the family, going to the shops with the family, you know, doing the bonfire with the family. These were all in his quality world. And so we were able to get him to refocus some of those thoughts and behaviors, and he was able to participate with his family, and he started feeling better. And so we looked at some of the thoughts that he had and some of his statements that we heard all the time. I can't go because I slow everyone down, or I can't have them see me this way. And so when I started running through the procedures that lead to change with him, it's what do you want? Well, I want to go to the beach. And then you're like, but. So I asked him, is it working? And he was able to identify for himself, no, it wasn't. And this is the same kind of thing that we also work with our trauma patients. And while Tom was primarily one of my chronic pain patients, the trauma that he was dealing with was a workplace injury. And that wasn't something that he wanted to acknowledge or express. And so we were able to come at that trauma through total behavior and working the procedures that lead to change. So when we started talking to him about, he wanted to go with his family, what he was doing, which was staying at home and not participating, wasn't working for him because all of a sudden these depressing behaviors are coming out. We looked at what can you do differently, and that's where the foldable chair came in, wearing comfortable shoes, having a little extra back support. And in doing so, he was able to go to the beach. He was able to get that love and belonging need met by participating with his family. He got that fun and freedom need met because he got to make some choices that he didn't think were choices that were options for him. And so in his experience, when he got back in touch with me after this beach trip, it was a different Tom. He was realizing the control that he had over that emotional component. And he, like a lot of other people out there, were so conditioned to the idea of external control that we were able to show him a new path. And that was really exciting for him. But when I asked him what really caught his attention, and for him, it was the idea of total behavior and the reference of the car and having something visual and tangible to hold on to was something that for him really worked. He actually posted the car on his refrigerator. And so every time he started to express some of those depressing behaviors or any of those anxiety behaviors, he would go back and say, okay, I need to look at the car, and he would focus on, what am I doing? Okay, it's not working for me. So how can I change my actions and my thoughts to help that car turn the corner? And knowing that sometimes it's that little smart car and everything's going to turn the corner at the same time, and sometimes it's that stretched limo, really helped him understand that continuously practicing turning those front wheels made it a lot easier with getting those back wheels to turn the corner when he needed it. And I think that's something that we oftentimes forget when working with patients with trauma, is that it's practice. Because oftentimes these things in their minds come on very suddenly. They'll have a panic attack. They'll have a severe anxiety attack that they don't think they have control over. And so continuously having them practice these activities of changing their thoughts, changing their behaviors, make it a lot easier for them to tap into that process versus when they don't practice it at home, and start to make some of those changes slowly, because again, they're so focused in on that external control concept. And once they start to really make that transition, they understand the power that they really have over themselves. And with what I do with my trauma patients, we do a lot of slow learning with this model. Again, active practicing. So some of the questions that I will ask them is, what is it that you do for fun? And a lot of times when they're involved in a traumatic thought process, they can't make that change. They are so stuck in that external control model that, again, that's where that practice comes into play. You know, every time you start feeling down or you start noticing some of this depressing, and I'll be honest, when I talk with my patients, I don't often use the language of Glasser in terms of depress. You know, you're making the choice to depress, because that is a real hard concept for them to wrap their heads around, especially in the beginning. So I will ask them, when you start to have these panic attacks, you know, when you start to notice that heavy breathing, that pounding in your chest, the shaking that often comes from that adrenaline release, um, you know, what is it that, you know, obviously same questions everybody else is asking. What are you thinking about? What are you doing in those moments? Because they do understand how they have control over those concepts, over that part of the, you know, the car. But that's why I have them practice it in times of, I don't want to say enjoyment, but in times of lower anxiety levels, lower depression levels. Because for a lot of my guys, when we start working with them, they don't ever see themselves outside of depression or outside of anxiety. So, you know, we practice it every day. They're practicing it 2 and 3 times a day. At least that's what I'm asking them to do. And oftentimes they do pretty well with it. And when we start looking at some of the past trauma, and I'll be honest, I hate the word trauma. I don't like to use it, because trauma means something different for everybody. And so I'll often use the word discomfort with my clients. You know, what's uncomfortable, what's, you know, because I have a lot of patients, oh, I don't have any trauma in my past. But when I really start to talk to them about, you know, some of this stuff, it can be hard for them to understand that they're still holding on to that incident of being bullied back in the 2nd grade, you know, where somebody out on the playground pulled down their pants and how embarrassing that was for them. And they're holding on to that for some reason. And so while we talk about the past and we talk about how they can move beyond it, we do address it. We do acknowledge that it happened. We do talk about it, but I'm also giving them permission through the Glasser concepts that they don't have to live there, that it's okay to let it go, which I think is missing in a lot of trauma treatment. I'm finding with a lot of people that I talk to who work in trauma, it's almost going back to a psychoanalytic process where you have to delve deep into the hidden underbellies of these traumas before anybody can move through it. And I'm finding that a lot of my clients, once they acknowledge that it's there and they find that, and I hate to say, they find that I'm giving them permission to move beyond it quickly, because really I'm not giving them that permission, they're giving it to themselves. But when they hear it come out of my mouth, they believe that I'm giving them permission and that it's okay. It's, you can almost see the lightning that they have in their bodies. They go from this sort of hunched over, kind of curled up in a little ball person when they talk to me, to sitting up a little taller, to holding their head taller, to uncrossing their legs and their arms when they start talking, because they're realizing the power that they have over themselves, and how much power they've been giving away to others and to incidents that happened 20 years ago. So, you know, like I said, I give this chart, or this card to every one of my clients. They also get a copy of the 5 basic needs, so that they can put them wherever they need to do it or have it. They've got some that have them in their car, some that have them in their wallet, some that post them on their walls, on their fridge. And after a couple sessions, that's when I start using the language of Glasser, and reminding them that they're making these choices and that they have that control. But like I said, trauma is a very externally controlled treatment mode. The treatment modalities for trauma, I guess is a better way to say it, is a very external control model. And so it's been a bit of a challenge in working with some of these guys who have seen multiple therapists multiple times, who have all told them that, you know, all of this was something that, like I said, they have to delve deep into that underbelly of the trauma. I've also been partnering Glasser with EMDR, which is an interesting thing to do. I don't know if anybody's really familiar with EMDR, but it stands for eye movement desensitization reprocessing. Sorry, I don't say the full thing very often. And so it's a way for them to use bilateral stimulation in the processing of the trauma without focusing deep down in the trauma, which is why I think it actually works really well with Glasser, because it allows them to, again, give themselves permission to stop holding on to it and letting it just transition from one side of their brain to the other, where it doesn't take it away. It doesn't take the trauma away or the discomfort away, but it allows them the, and I use power a lot because I think it's an amazing word, but it gives them the power back to say that this incident isn't going to have the control over my emotional state. I have that power. And so when I initially do all of the education on Glasser, total behavior, you know, quality world, and then I partner that with the EMDR. And then when we process those sessions afterwards, I find that they will start using the words and the language of Glasser. So I'm finding that it's actually really helpful in speeding it up, shall we say, in getting the Glasser concepts more solidified for them. And I'm finding that they're getting faster results in moving beyond that. And I think a lot of that's coming from the fact that I'm giving them that Glasser education or the total behavior, you know, concepts and the basic needs concepts, and that it's really their choice. So I think we're about the 23 mark. So, and I could talk about this forever. So, but I'll reach out back to Mona and you know, see if there are questions or thoughts on this.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. When you were talking about there initially about the collective things with the body and the relationship factors and all that, how it just kind of piles up on you, the first thought that came to my head that it is more than just all in your head.
It is. And one thing that, like I said, my foundation comes from chronic pain, and then, you know, trauma as part of that. But one of the things we know is it's kind of like it's a big circle, you know. When we sit on the couch, you know, when we're in pain and we sit on the couch, what we're doing is we're focusing on how much it hurts. And when we focus on how much it hurts more. And it's the same concept that, at least in my experience with those discomforting events, that, you know, the more we focus on those discomforting events, or I can't do it because I can't do it, we get stuck. And when we focus on the can't, it'll increase the pain, it'll increase the emotional reaction to the discomforting event. So that it's a self-perpetuating circle. And by getting them to turn the wheels on the car and start focusing on well, I can, even if it's modified, we're finding that they're able to realize their power.
Exactly. And when you're focusing on the procedures that lead to change and to practice, to practice, to
Mm-hmm.
practice, to practice, that you are helping them to release that control.
Yes, yes, and it's funny because I have a lot of them who don't believe me when I tell them they need to practice this. And I'll give them examples from from myself. If I'm feeling bummed out, I'll be honest. The first thing I do is I pop on the soundtrack for Mamma Mia. I don't care what you're doing, but that there is so much energy behind that, and I find that I have a really hard time sitting in my negative thoughts if I've got that soundtrack popping through my head. If I need to clean the house and I don't want to, again, I pop that soundtrack on because it gives me energy to get the stuff done. And so when they come in and they're like, "Oh God, I had this panic attack and I froze and I crawled under the table and I started crying for 3 hours," and I start to walk them backwards in, well, what did you notice before this came on? Well, I noticed this stuff. And well, what were you thinking about? Well, I was focused in on this incident. Okay, and what were you doing? Well, I was, and they'll start to run through their process. And okay, have you been practicing? Have you been practicing changing your thoughts, changing your behaviors? Well, no. But as soon as they start to do that practicing 2 and 3 times a day, it is so much easier to recall, um, kind of like that muscle memory. It just sort of kicks in. And then they start doing it and they notice their panic attacks aren't lasting as long. Or they'll notice that, okay, my heart is starting to race. What am I thinking about? I need to change that thought. I need to get up and move around. Um, I need to change what I'm doing. And they're noticing that they're able to avoid those attacks. Um, and it's, like I said, it's just so empowering for them to realize that it's a choice that they're making to do these things to themselves, and they keep handing the power over to others.
And in that practicing, I'm just seeing in my mind a clock and how that there are certain triggers,
Right.
that's going to affect. And as you help them to practice not focusing on that particular
Mm-hmm.
thing in that particular time. And then when you talk,
Right.
go ahead.
Oh no, I was just agreeing with you.
And then when you were talking about how you can begin to see them, that you do give them permission, but they're really giving themselves permission. It's almost, and you see them sitting up and being more alert.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost as though you see them embracing freedom.
I love the way you just said that. I'm going to steal that. Uh, that's awesome. But yeah, it really is. And I'm thinking to a woman that I'm working with right now, who literally, when I started working with her, in our first 10 minutes of conversation, she had curled up into a little ball, into the fetal position on the couch. And within 3 of our sessions, she was walking in, she was sitting down, she wasn't curling up in that little ball anymore. She was having conversations that she felt needed to be had with other people. And it was funny because she looked at me and she's like, "It's all me." And I looked at her and I said, "What do you mean?" And she's like, "It's all me. I've been doing this to me."
Mhm.
And I'm like, "Yeah, absolutely. And what's it feel like to be able to say that out loud?" And she's like, "It sucks because now I realize I did it to myself." And I said, "Yeah, I get that. It does kind of suck when we don't have everybody else to blame, but how empowering is it to know that you can change it?"
Because we know ourselves by hearsay.
Mm-hmm.
What other people have said, we stuck those labels on us and we live down to it
Right.
till we get to know who we are and give
Right.
ourselves permission to grow and to change. And back here also, whenever you were talking about practice, 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 and what practice is, I just wrote down practice is healing.
Yes.
You're practicing to heal yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, this
Yeah,
has
you
been
really
so
are.
good. There's a lot of meat here to digest and to grow from. And I thank you
Right.
so very much. Our airtime is coming to an end, so we're going to close this as the program itself and invite those that are watching this later to join us live. Because after our speaker speaks and we close out, we open the airways to everyone that is here visiting to make comment and to chat on for a while. So thank you for watching, being with us today, as well as watching later, and wish you good mental health.